outcries continue over the death of George Floyd. Last night, people protesting in
Stop
Minneapolis
letting people talk you out of your power.
How do we build a movement that allows us to respond to all the names that people don't know?
People begin to think it's isolated. That's the problem. We're not angry enough.
This is Life After the Impact, a podcast for impacted families by impacted families that focuses on what happens after the media, the lawyers, and the activists are gone.
When the cameras are gone, people leave. We have to be there for each other.
Impacted families are left to face the loss of a loved one to police-sponsored violence. We will focus on their continued fight for justice and how you can get involved.
I tell families, fight.
Everybody can do something, that you don't have to sit home and feel helpless and hopeless.
We gotta stop allowing people to talk us out of our power. That's the main thing.
Can't change overnight, but we gotta start somewhere. Might as well go ahead, start here.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Roxanne Johnson. My son's name is Jamal Byrd. He was murdered by DC Metropolitan Police October the 1st, 2019. I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Latoya. Good day, Latoya. How you doing?
Right. It sounds different to say good day versus good evening, right? A little confused with me too. Hi, you guys. My name is Latoya Benton. I am the mother of the beautiful Xavier Hill. Xavier was killed January the 9th, 2021 at the age of 18 by two Virginia State troopers. As you guys know, at Life After the Impact, we are about that action. We said at the beginning of the year that we wanted this to be the year of education, and it was very important to make sure that we are reaching out to different authors, professors, who are actually diving into the subject of police brutality and policing. So we're honored this afternoon to be joined by Professor Vitale. Could you give a brief introduction of who you are and the novel that you wrote, please?
Sure. Hi, Latoya. Hi, Roxanne. So my name's Alex Vitale. I am a sociologist. I teach at Brooklyn College in the CUNY Graduate Center here in New York. I've been working on policing issues for over 30 years in a variety of capacities: public policy, journalism, writing, research, etc. And I run a small public policy shop called the Policing and Social Justice Project. And a few years ago, I wrote a book called The End of Policing that became a kind of touchstone for the defund the police movement and basically has helped to shape some of the conversations about what we should do about abusive policing.
Thank you so very much. So as you guys can see, I have my copy right here. And Roxanne has her copy as well. I actually went to I was at Danielle Ronchester's mom. I was at her event, and they had a book library there. I picked this book up, right? And I began telling Roxanne, I was like, Roxanne, you got to read this book. I said, he wrote something just because I think, like I was explaining to her too as well, like we both were talking about the way you wrote it. Not only are you doing research as far as producing with history and like with facts, but I feel like it's from both sides. Even people who are like super pro-police, you kind of gave it from their angle, and people who are totally against the police, you kind of give from that perspective too. Can you kind of just speak on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, the title doesn't seem to be sympathetic to both sides, but it's sympathetic to police in the sense that it understands the difficult position individual officers find them in. It's not about demonizing them as individuals, as human beings. It's about raising some larger policy questions about why are we putting police officers in situations that they're really not capable of properly handling. Mm-hmm. Why have we turned every social problem under the sun over to the police to manage? And a lot of what they do, they don't want to be doing. They know that it can lead to trouble. And it's really a lot of these problems are political problems that have been inherited by the police because of really poor decisions made by our elected leaders.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, when you look at, I like that you included the history, not just in this country, but across the pond in England, of how they basically use this to solve their problems with the people, right? You're arguing or you're complaining about your work environment, and so these rich people got protection and got people to kind of be their enforcers to keep the other people, the working class, in check. How that relates to what we see in this country.
Yeah, so basically, this whole concept of modern policing is quite new. It's only for the most part, it's less than 200 years old. This is a very new idea. And so what I tried to do was trace the origins of this idea and look more specifically at what were the social conditions that existed in places like London, in New York, in Charleston, South Carolina, that gave rise to this new form of government power. And basically what I found was that policing emerges in the 1800s to overcome resistance or to manage the consequences of the most exploitative economic systems that existed in the 1900s. And these are colonialism, slavery, and mass industrialization. And what I found over and over again when I looked at the formation of these individual police departments was that there was a crisis of resistance to one or more of these systems of exploitation. They were either trying to prevent slave revolts, they were trying to put down anti-colonial movements, they were trying to stop worker organizing in the factories, and they needed a tool that was capable of overcoming this resistance in a way that was more subtle than just sending in the military and shooting people down in the streets. And that really explains the rise of policing in Europe, in South America, in Asia, and throughout the United States.
Well, how is our brand of policing so different and so nuanced that it creates this level of violence? Like you're talking to two women who lost their children to police violence. How does it create that? Why is that so in this country?
Yeah, there are so many horrible, tragic stories. Our police are so incredibly violent and kill and injure so many people. And we've had 10 years of so-called police reform since Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri, and the number of police killings keeps going up, not down. So what can explain this? Well, we often compare ourselves to Europe, where the number of people killed by police is very small. And part of this is because in general, these are less violent societies. There's less gun ownership, less usage of guns. But we got to ask ourselves like a bigger question. Well, why is that? What's the big difference? And I think a big part of it is a really important difference in our historical trajectories. In Europe, they relied on slavery, they relied on colonialism, but those activities didn't happen in Europe. They happened in Africa, they happened in Latin America, they happened in Asia. And so the violence of colonialism, the violence of slavery, the fetishizing of gun ownership happened somewhere else. It didn't happen in Manchester. It didn't happen in Frankfurt. It didn't happen in Paris. It happened in Bombay. It happened in Nigeria. It happened in Brazil. In the United States, our slavery, our colonialism happened right here. The American public that were the white American public had guns, and they used them to shoot slaves, to shoot native peoples. We had a culture of violence and gun ownership that has been at the center of the American political and economic and social regime. And so policing is just a continued extension of that.
Yes,
And our culture of guns and violence is very much an extension of that. And we have never, as a society, really acknowledged and come to terms with that history. We continue to see our elected officials across the country in denial about it and actually trying to criminalize people from talking about it. In places like Florida, it's you can't go to school and learn these things. They've thrown the books out. They're doing book burnings essentially, right? We find the books in the dumpsters. They're purging these ideas. And so this just means more guns, more violence, more trauma that has never been addressed, more inequality that keeps reproducing itself, and more policing to try to put a lid on that.
Now, I keep hearing you go back to saying things as far as political is concerned. We talk a lot on here often about, the power of the vote, not just on the presidential side, but just on the local side as well, right? Can you kind of explain what you mean? Again, because we want to make sure we have the audience, they're educated on this, as far as when we talk about the voting side and how it kind of goes hand in hand with policing. Can you kind of go a little bit more in depth about that as well?
Sure. So first I want to say this is not some simple case of party politics.
Right.
This party versus that party. It's much deeper than that. We have problems in both of our political parties. We have a lot of cities run by Democratic mayors who have turned every problem over to the police, who excuse police violence, who empower police unions. So this is not just about partisan politics. This is not about Harris versus Trump. This is a much bigger problem that really requires us to think critically about the candidates we vote for in both parties at all levels of government. Now, in a way, policing in the United States is a fairly local matter. In Europe, people mostly have national police departments, for instance, but we have 19,000 independent local police departments in the United States. So it's local mayors and city councils that are deciding on budget priorities and oversight of police departments. But the state and federal government play a role in part because so many of the problems that have been turned over to the police to manage, like mass homelessness, like untreated mental health and substance abuse problems, failed schools, economic insecurity, unaddressed past traumas. These are problems that state and federal governments have helped create. And they have contributed to putting resources and emphasis into policing and prisons instead of care and, solidarity and compassion, the kinds of things that would actually make our communities safer.
Right.
So what I say to people is, and I talk to a lot of people who want to run for office. I talk to people who are elected officials. I say, we have to articulate a new kind of politics about public safety that isn't rooted in the concepts of control, of violence, of intimidation and harassment, of deterrence. We need to articulate a vision of public safety that's around care, compassion, and solidarity, about healing people, about giving people a stable foundation, about fixing communities, about making sure that people's basic needs are met, because those are the things that really create healthy, safe, vibrant communities. So when politicians of either party tell us that they're working to solve homelessness and they have a picture of themselves going into the police department, that signals to us that they're not really on board with the real solution.
That's right.
That they're not actually trying to solve the homeless problem. They're trying to cover it up.
Yeah.
They're trying to reduce its impact on, better off middle class, upper class people. They're not walking into the housing bureau. They're not walking into the social services bureau, and this is a real problem in our cities across the country, is these politicians who continue to tell us the police are the solution to our problems while they take funding away from libraries and after school programs, social services, health spending, housing, and all the rest.
But Professor, I would say it's politicians' issue as well as a community. Because as community members, when we don't hold people accountable and follow up to what they say they're going to do, it becomes an ongoing cycle. Would you not agree?
Yeah, so we're in a difficult situation here because for literally for generations, poor communities of color, have been told by elected officials they can have one thing to solve their community problems, and that's more police.
Literally, you're
prison
right.
sentences and all that.
Yep.
And when the community says, well, okay, but what we really want is for the community center to be open for our kids after school with some real mentoring services, some trauma counseling, we're told, no, you can't have that, but you can have more police. And so communities have been left with this horrible false choice of policing or nothing.
Right.
And, a lot of communities are hurting. There is violence. There is insecurity, right? There are problems. So people are desperate for resources to address their problems, but they're given this horrible choice. And so what I'm proposing, and so that means, there are a lot of people in our communities who want more police, and it's understandable.
Yeah, they're under the false sense that the police are there to protect them. We hear a lot of times that that the police are supposed to protect us. They're supposed to keep us from harm and be the safe place. And the reality is that a lot of our communities are over policed, but are still just as unsafe if
That's
they weren't
right.
policed at all. Yeah,
That's exactly right. And the solution to that is not even more policing.
right.
The solution to that is to try new strategies, which is what a lot of cities are experimenting with now, which is exciting. A lot of experiments out there. And we need those experiments to be able to go to communities and say, hey, there is a choice other than policing. We could ask for what we really want, right? To keep our kids safe, to get them on a healthy trajectory, to help stabilize our communities. But people often just are so hopeless about the possibility of those things, they've given up asking for it. And so part of our job is to give people that sense of possibility, to give them the tools that they need to ask for things that are really going to help. Because we don't just need a midnight basketball program. We don't just need an after school program for the kids who are already getting A's in school, right? We need targeted interventions that address the needs of the kids who are in the most difficult circumstances, who are hurting the most, because we know those are the kids who are going to cause the most problems for the community.
That's right.
And I always say, if you talk to any middle school teacher, they know who those kids are. They can already tell who those kids are who are really in crisis. And right now, for the most part, the only option they have is to call the school resource officer and
put them out of school.
Have them expelled.
Yeah, that's what I was reading in the book too as well. And I couldn't get past certain points because I kept texting people and saying, well, would you do this? Would you do that? Because even the part about the school resource officers, that really bothered me, because I was thinking about how many schools are like Title I schools and how many schools are getting like state funding. And instead of them addressing the problem that the kid has, like you said, they much rather just push them out of the way. And then after that, you push them out of the way, and it's like prison the pipeline. So it's a kind of like a reverse cycle all over again. So like you said too, how do we get to the root of the problem?
Well, we just had this horrible incident down south.
That's right.
14-year-old student who shot up his school. And it now turns out
they knew
two things. A, they knew. And B, this kid asked for help repeatedly.
That's right. That's right.
And the only response was to send the police first ahead of time. And the police, because they're police, they're like, well, we don't have enough to arrest the kid, so there's nothing we can do.
Yeah.
Right? Totally failed strategy. And then they just wait till the kid has already shot up the school, and then they intervene after the fact.
Right.
Right? So it's a double failure.
Yeah.
Policing does not keep our kids safe in school. It didn't work in Uvalde. It didn't work at Parkland. There were armed police at Columbine High School when that shooting started. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. What works is identifying kids in crisis early, giving them intensive services, addressing problems at home, stabilizing their lives, getting them mental health and trauma counseling. This is what works. But we have millions of children in the United States that go to schools with police officers, but no counselors, no nurses, no librarian, no decent after-school services. And then we act shocked when some of these kids cause harms.
Yeah. So how do we start to, we always talk about changing people's mindset because, you know, this country, because of the history, as you indicated, tends to favor law and order, right? Oh, we need law and order. But like you said, that's not working. How do we start to change the mindsets of people so that they realize that community-based services are definitely better for everybody involved?
And before you answer that real fast, hold on, answer real fast. Just last week, Roxanne, before we got started on our conversation, she had a tidbit point about just the mindset of being helpless. And oftentimes people who come on this podcast, they go into with the mindset of that they're helpless. We have a thing about, we have a thing we talk about all the time about just the culture conditioning. So we can recognize that as a problem, but like Roxanne just said, how do we get to people who actually understand it's not just about somebody being shot in the street. It goes way, way, way deeper than that.
Well, you know, the problems with policing intersect with all kinds of parts of our lives, right? And we got police in our medical facilities, police in our schools, police on our street, you know, and they are causing harms in these places, and they're not succeeding at keeping us safe. What I have seen across the country is that the best approach has been a targeted and focused approach where folks come together and say, let's try to address a particular public safety problem that's important to the community outside of using the police and the courts and prisons. Let's look at examples that exist. Let's look at research. Let's try to bring in some allies from outside who can bring us some expertise and experience. And let's see if we can get some community mental health services this year and a non-police crisis response capacity so that when a mom calls for help for her kid, it's not somebody with a gun that shows up. It's somebody who has actual mental health training, right? Or let's try to replace those armed school police officers with counselors and mentors and people who can provide our young people real services when they're in crisis. Or let's run a campaign to try to create real community-centered violence reduction initiatives, you know, that hires people from within the community who have credibility in the eyes of young people to do mentoring, to do mediation, to do crisis response. And the cities that have done this, one program here, one program, have had very positive results. So I do work in Newark, New Jersey, where they have created a very extensive community-based violence reduction program, independent of the police department. They're getting involved in the lives of young people. They're mediating disputes at 2 a.m. You know, they're really doing the work. And violence in Newark is at a 60-year low. This is really working.
Wow.
And other cities are looking at it, and folks are trying to get the federal government and state governments to put more resources into this. We could look at what's going on in Denver, Colorado, where they took mental health crisis calls about someone who may be homeless, having a crisis, and they created a civilian team, several of them. It's called the STAR program. And they respond through 911 24 hours a day to someone having a crisis instead of sending police. None of these people have been harmed. They almost never call the police for assistance. They go out and help people. And when a person in crisis sees a civilian who maybe they've interacted with before in a positive way, who's not there to arrest them or to beat them up, they react very differently than when an armed police officer shows up, who has no real ability to help them, only to arrest them or force them into a hospital or do nothing. And so it completely changes the dynamic. And between 1.25% of all people killed by police in the United States are having a mental health crisis. So that one intervention right there could save hundreds of lives a year potentially.
Yeah. And like you mentioned in your book, it's like we criminalize mental illness, right? I mean, they mention that with this, every school, every shooting is always, oh, well, the person had mental illness. So it's almost like the person listening to the news or listening to the response about why this happened. Oh, well, yeah, that person had mental health issues, so that's why that happened.
Instead of thinking, well, why on earth did we send someone with a gun?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And then they also have, you know, a lot of times too, I like how you said how I think with a lot of cities right now, they have what's put in place for like civilian review boards, right? And now when I kind of like think about that, I'm like, well, that's still reviewing it after the fact, right?
That's right.
You're not being proactive because, and then a lot of times I know my son first got killed, I was riding on that because that's all I knew. The only thing I knew about was getting a civilian review board. But now when I think about it, I'm like, well, that don't make no sense because by this point in time, the crime already happened. But if we put, you know, things in place that help out beforehand versus after the fact, you know, more so being proactive than being retroactive. The system is set up to do things after the fact versus prior to. And like you said, too, even with the community just stepping up, you know, and like, you know, just being that vessel and actually going out there in the nighttime and like helping to the things we complain about, we gotta be the ones who actually gonna show up and actually do the work.
But we need support to do that, right?
Right.
You know, we can't just do that on our own.
That's right.
So let's just talk about civilian review boards for a moment. I mean, we know that the police are unaccountable.
That's right.
We know that there's this like culture of impunity in policing. And so it's understandable that people would want to try to do something about that, so that there's this understandable kind of drive to create more oversight, to get body cameras, to create civilian review boards, but they don't work.
They don't
work. There's not a single example of them working. All across the country, these things have been created and not a single one of them has made policing any better.
Yeah.
What they do typically is they take a lot of anger from the community. Something bad happens. They channel it into a bureaucratic process that takes years and at the end of which does nothing.
You're right. You're right.
Or you know, well, we're going to take away 2 vacation days because you didn't follow some policy properly. But nothing happens. And it's designed, I would argue, to just dissipate that anger, those demands for change. The impunity of policing is a feature, not a bug.
That's right.
It is policing can't operate as an accountable body. It cannot be accountable to the public and do what it does. If you want accountability, send someone other than the police. That's really what it comes down to. When you send the police, what you're doing is you're unleashing a group of violence workers that by definition are not going to be publicly accountable.
Wow.
That's true.
Wow. And just to kind of add on to your point there, Professor, we had a conversation in our last podcast with a lawyer who basically told us that, and she has done policy where they actually put money into the budget to account for wrongful death suits.
Right.
So now you're even, I know when I go out, I'm going to be violent. I'm going to take other people's lives, and we're going to put it in the budget so that when it happens, a way to deal with it instead of addressing why you have to do that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, obviously, the survivors of police violence want some justice, and one of the ways we measure justice in the United States is to bring a lawsuit and seek damages, and those damages are given a high number value because they're supposed to act as a deterrent on the institution. So if a company, for instance, is polluting a community, we give them a really big fine, or we find them guilty in civil court and we give them big damages so that they stop doing it. But it doesn't work in policing. Again, the impunity is the point. So when we get settlements against the police department or judgments against the police department, it doesn't come out of the police budget. It comes out of the city budget.
That's right.
It has no effect on the police department at all.
That's right.
Now, some people have said, well, the solution to that is to make the individual officer pay. And that's understand, or to try to take it out of the police budget. But this is not going to work. It's not going to work. So first of all, you can't take it out of we're not going to be able to get it out of the police budget, because the police budget is the way it is because that's what people in power want.
That's right. It's working how it's designed.
Every dollar you take out in settlements, they're just going to put back in, and nothing's going to change. Now, for individual officers, it's the same situation. What departments are going to do and what cities will do is they will just pay for insurance for individual officers. So the officer will pay $10 a month in insurance, and the city will pay $100 a month. And then the officer will have an insurance fund. And so if they personally are found liable for $1 million in damage, the insurance company pays. That's the way they'll set it up. So this is a kind of fantasy that somehow we're going to use, lawsuit settlements to fix policing. It doesn't work. All these settlements have never changed anything meaningful about policing. And they basically do two things. One is they do bring resources to the survivors, which can be important and life-changing for them. And it makes a lot of lawyers rich.
That's it.
That's it.
And sometimes it's mostly the second.
When they also settle the cases too, it doesn't do anything for case law.
No.
At all, right?
It doesn't. It doesn't. Yeah, they settle these cases, and often a condition of the settlement is no admission of guilt, no public accountability, no sharing of information about what happened. You just get your check to be quiet.
That's it.
Shut up.
And of course, they tell the families this right away. Don't make trouble. Don't make trouble in the streets, because you're in negotiation with us about what kind of settlement you're going to get from us.
Well, this is true. Yeah, so they put that little gray cloud over your head, right?
That's right.
But you want to go out there and scream your loved one's name, but you're kind of like, well, maybe, so it's, again, less of the two evils, right? So it's designed that way. So I think, Professor, another thing we were trying to gear to is, so back to the question, how do we, knowing this information, right? Because this is vital to know. Even just the intricate parts of the system and how it, like you said too, it's not gonna happen overnight, and it's had to be peeled back in layers. How can we begin helping the culture, our own culture? Remember when Barack had ran for presidency and Diddy was going around saying vote or die and telling everyone young, vote or die, and he had the whole wave pool going, right? People right now paying attention right now because of who's running for presidency. But after the election goes away, you know how the hype is going to go down too as well. How do we keep the culture where we begin to actually understand the very intricate parts about policing, even when it comes to the school systems? Like, how do you get people to understand, like, because everyone might not read the book, but they might not read it.
What?
Right?
Really? Oh, come on.
Oh.
I have some videos on YouTube
Points
people
out
can
here.
watch instead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that'd be good then.
So look, it's very convenient for people to think that politics is something they do once every 4 years on an afternoon where they go and stand in line and cast a presidential ballot and then pat themselves on the back that they did politics. And
right.
That's not going to cut it.
That's right.
People with real power, with money and influence, they do politics every day.
Every day.
Every day. They are steering the ship in a way that benefits them every day. And they are so happy when the rest of us think politics is something we do in the school cafeteria once every 4 years.
Yeah.
That is a dream for them because that means the other 365 days a year, they get what they want.
That's right.
They steer the ship.
That's right.
So the first step, I think, is we have to come together. We have to join organizations. It's boring sometimes. It's frustrating sometimes. You know, we have this sort of saying in our house, Thursday night is meeting night. Somebody's got to go to a meeting, their union meeting, a neighborhood meeting, and we don't always want to do it, but you got to do it.
Right.
You got to keep your hands in the game.
That's right.
And so there are a lot of groups out there, a lot of things to choose from. You got to find your own way. You got to find your own community of people. But we have to create this culture that says that Thursday night is meeting night. I'm not going to watch the football game.
That's right.
Maybe the kids have to have takeout for dinner that night because I got to go to this tenants association meeting. And I got to make sure that the little old church lady running the tenants association meeting is not calling for more police to criminalize my kids.
This is true. Yeah.
It's facts. This is facts. It's facts. And so, you know, as the title of your book kind of alludes to, I'm going to, I'll tell you first, I am an abolitionist when it comes to policing. You know, there's no redeeming, there's no reforming of this entity, right? And I think that you're on the same page. But how did you get to the point where you said, you know, this is not redeemable. We got to put the end of policing.
Yeah, I don't have like a simple answer to that. I think that I was aware of these ideas for a long time, especially that these ideas were much more prevalent in relationship to prisons. So I was aware of prison abolition as a concept, but I worked mostly on like policing issues. And so it took me a while to kind of think through for myself what this would mean, what this would look like for policing. And I basically had this idea though before the Ferguson uprising. I actually had the deal to write the book before the Ferguson uprising happened. And I had been reading a lot of prison abolition stuff and teaching some of it especially to my graduate students to get us to think about it. And that helped me to think more and more concretely about how to do this. And as you've seen, right, the book is very practical. It's not like an abstract imagining. It's a playbook for how to actually do it. And, you know, for me, abolition is not so much this abstract ideal goal that we imagine in the future. Abolition is a way of understanding how the world works that helps us make decisions today, not in some far off future that we hope will somehow magically occur, you know, so that when there is a fight in my kid's school and the city council member says, well, we need to put more cops in the school and metal detectors, an abolitionist analysis says that's a bad idea. That doesn't work. That doesn't make my kid's life better. What we need is an actual strategy of addressing why those kids were getting into fights. Do we need to bring in some neighborhood mentors? Do we need to bring in some better after school programs because the kids are bored and frustrated? Do we need to bring in more mental health counselors because the kids are experiencing violence in the home and abuse in the community? You know, so that's a decision I got to make right now, not in some imagined perfect future. And so abolition is a very concrete way of seeing the world that helps us make decisions now and helps us avoid the mistakes of thinking if we just give the police anti-bias training, you know, that's going to fix the problem. Or if we just hire a black police chief, that's going to fix the problem. Or if we just give the police, you know, body cameras, that's somehow going to magically fix the problem. No, the problem is, the solution is to get them out of our lives in as many ways as we possibly can, because it's an inherently harmful institution that has been at the center of reproducing race and class inequality in the United States.
Right. And since we don't deal with the issues of race and class in this country, dealing with that is going to be just, you know, like LaToya says, like, you know, peeling back these layers. And I can imagine that back in 1838, when abolitionist says, you know, we got to do away with this chattel slavery, people probably thought they were crazy too, right? You know, what do you mean?
Yes.
I actually, you know, posed it to a friend of mine, you know, very thoughtful person, and she was like, well, who's going to protect us? I was like, who protecting you now? You know, so it's our mindset about these things. And when we say abolish something, from you to your point, we're not saying do away with it and not putting something more healthy,
right,
more positive.
I don't know about you, but I don't have the power to make police disappear tomorrow.
I wish I did.
The people ask these questions. People ask these questions as if, well, because I said something, there's going to be no police tomorrow, and then what?
Right.
I can't make that happen.
Right.
We have this massive system in place, and what I'm talking about is, what direction should we be moving in?
That's right.
What direction should we be moving in? And do I have the ironclad solution to every possible problem in the foreseeable future? No, of course not. But I have some principles and some experience that help us figure out which path is going to lead us in the right direction, and which path is going to keep us moving in the wrong direction.
That's right. And we have to start somewhere.
Somewhere.
If we want to save humanity, because see, that's what's at stake. It's not just about, you know, me or LaToya or you. It's about humanity.
That's right.
And so we have to take it up a level and start thinking, you know, well, if they stop doing this in the Black community, or if they start doing this in the Hispanic community, then it'll be well. No, it's for the humanity. It's for
Every
our
dollar we spend on policing is a dollar we don't have to address the climate crisis,
That's
to
right.
address the failures of education,
That's
to
right.
address the housing crisis. Every dollar we spend on policing is a dollar moving us in the wrong direction.
Right. And then how many trick tickets can you really write in a month, right? Send it to me in the mail. Don't stop me in the street. Take a picture of my license and hit me up, you know.
This is a tax on poor people for the most part.
I say that all the time, Professor. It's just another way to tax poor people.
Here in Brooklyn, where I live, you know, one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city is East New York, and they estimate that $60 million a year pulled out of that community for totally pointless fines and fees for just totally low-level nonsense. And if we could invest that money in the community in positive ways, people's lives would be so much better.
Yeah, totally agree. Professor, I want to thank you so very much for coming on Black After Impact to share your book with us. You guys, again, if you haven't gotten this great book, I'm holding to the screen. Pick your copy up today, The End of Policing. It's a simple read. When I say simple read, I mean, it doesn't go, it's not over your head, I can tell you that. It's very simple, straight to the point. It's full of facts, right? To the point that I was even like, I think I kept texting Roxanne. The first chapter, I couldn't get through it because I kept finding out new things that was just so intriguing to my own brain, right? So again, as you guys, we say all the time, we about that action, right? Be sure to get a copy of this book. Again, we say all the time too, it's not just about just ending police and not putting things in place. We as a community have to gather together to see how we move forward. So be sure to say it one more time, get a copy, you guys. And he already said you don't want to read this on YouTube, right, Professor?
Yeah, the audio book is on YouTube, and there are lots of videos of me explaining these ideas, and yeah, easy to track down this stuff.
What's your presence on YouTube? Is it your name?
I mean, I have a channel or whatever, but if people just Google me, they will find dozens and dozens of interviews like this and speeches that I've given, et cetera, trying to lay out these ideas in very simple, plain language.
Cool.
And they say a lot of times too, you want to hide knowledge from somebody, put it into a book, right? You guys, we got to pick up and start reading, right? And like I said again, you don't want to read it, get off YouTube and listen to the audio of it. We as a culture have to change our mindset. We're not helpless. We're just not organized a lot of the time. So let's put our time and energy back into our community. As you guys know as well, just real fast, we wrap our conversation up. At Light of the Impact, we are trying to establish a legal defense fund for the community. As we just talked about just right now, a lot of times the resources that we need, we don't have those things. So we as a people have to begin to build our own resources. Mel, if you don't mind, could you please run the donation clip video? Okay, so oftentimes, you guys, as we said, as Fletcher just talked about it here too, we're not talking about the cases that settle, I mean, and that's fine too, you want to settle the case. We're talking about cases we can create precedents as far as case law is concerned. Oftentimes, families who want to file a lawsuit, they can't afford to file a lawsuit, or they can't even find an attorney to do so. So our goal is to raise at least $1,000 to go towards our legal defense fund. I want to say we're over half of that right now, Roxanne, is that correct?
We're at 570. We need that 430 to come on through.
Okay. And as again, we said too, the money is going to be donated for the Community Legal Defense Fund. We had a good conversation today just talking about how we build resources within our community. And this is the way that we're going to get started. So you guys can please find in your heart to please donate. All amounts are accepted and are greatly appreciated.
Yes, we really appreciate it. Thank you once again, Professor, for being for gracing us with your presence and your knowledge. And you know, I know that our audience got a lot out of this conversation. Do take some of the pointers that have been mentioned here. Find a community of people to start doing some of this work.
But it's been a pleasure and an honor, ladies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
This has been Life After the Impact. Find out how you can get involved. Peace.
And quite frankly, the work that the two of you have embarked on is so critical, because just as you need to challenge these occurrences in court, that you need to hold these municipalities accountable directly, because I'll tell you, these cities budget for it. I think that was one of the things that blew my mind, you know, when I was working for the city and really realized this was in the budget.
That's crazy.
It is.
That's crazy.
It's not like it's coming out of nowhere and it's like, oh, you're hurting our city and we got to pay you, because already in the budget. They already know the police are going to do things that the city is going to have to financially compensate for in order to provide restitution to make things whole. That's how deeply ingrained this police violence is in our society. It's already expected, and the money part is worked into the budget because they know it's coming. They know they're going to have to pay out because every year there are these occurrences.
Everybody can do something, that you don't have to sit home and feel helpless and hopeless.
We gotta stop allowing people to talk us out of our power. That's the main thing.